Sometimes a single moment in a quiet restaurant can peel back years of buried truths. When a poised elderly woman walks in alone for a simple dinner, no one expects that the waiter's subtle disrespect would trigger a chain of events revealing who she really is and who her son turns out to be. What follows is a lesson in humility, dignity, and the quiet power of those who refuse to be diminished. On a drizzly autumn evening in the heart of Brookstone City, a quiet bell rang above the door of the Willow Room, an upscale restaurant known more for its polished crowd than its warmth. Patrons in sleek jackets and heels barely looked up from their wine glasses when Ms. Althea Monroe, a 76-year-old black woman, stepped in. She walked with dignity, her stride steady despite the cane tucked beneath her arm. She wore a long beige coat with satin trim, a brooch pinned just beneath her collarbone, a birthday gift from her late husband decades ago. Althea's reservation had been made a week in advance for her birthday. The hostess, a young blonde woman named Cameron, offered a tight-lipped smile. "Name?" she asked without looking up. "Monroe, Althea Monroe." Cameron tapped the screen and gestured toward a table, cramped, poorly lit, next to the swinging kitchen doors. Althea said nothing, just nodded. Other tables filled with young couples and loud conversations buzzed with cheerful service. But at her table, time slowed. Minutes passed. No one brought water. No one came with a menu. She sat still, hands folded, noticing how even silence had weight in a place not built to welcome her. From behind the bar, Kyle, a waiter in his late 20s with rolled-up sleeves and an air of self-importance, caught a glimpse of Ms. Monroe. His jaw tightened. He leaned toward the bartender and whispered, "Another one with no tip coming, probably." The bartender frowned but said nothing. Kyle made his way toward Althea's table, but not before stopping at two others, laughing with a couple, winking at a group of office workers celebrating a birthday. When he finally reached her, he didn't smile. "We're really busy tonight," he said flatly. "Might be a while before I can get to you." "That's all right," Althea replied calmly. "I'm in no rush." Kyle gave a faint scoff and walked off. From a booth near the window, a young woman nudged her date. "Why hasn't that lady been helped yet?" she whispered. Her date shrugged. Althea sat with a calm expression, her eyes scanning the room, catching the stares, the dismissive glances, the discomfort. But what Kyle and no one else knew was that just beyond the service hallway, behind an oak office door, the restaurant's owner had been watching everything through the security feed. And his name was Julian Monroe, Althea's son. Julian Monroe, 38, owner of the Willow Room, sat motionless in his office chair, the security monitor glowing in front of him. He had watched his mother's quiet entrance, the cold welcome, the shoddy seat placement, and now Kyle's condescending behavior. He hadn't told the staff she would be dining in. He wanted to observe without interference. His mother had raised him alone, working 3 jobs while keeping her dignity intact. She taught him discipline, patience, and how to rise without bitterness. Opening the Willow Room had been his gift to her, a symbol of her strength. But now, seeing her treated like an afterthought in the very space she had inspired, it ignited something deep in him. He didn't move yet. Instead, he pressed the intercom. "Sienna," he said to the manager, "keep an eye on table 14. Do not interfere. I want to see how far Kyle takes this." There was a pause. "Understood," came the soft reply. Julian leaned back, his fingers steepled in front of his face. The man who taught staff about dignity first was about to see if his values had truly taken root, or if a hard lesson was still needed. More time passed. The soft clinking of glasses filled the air. Waiters flowed like clockwork between tables, except one. Althea's table remained untouched. No menu, no drink. Her water glass sat empty, untouched. Kyle walked past her 3 times without making eye contact. Each time she gave a polite nod. Each time he ignored it. At a nearby table, a couple muttered under their breath, "What's going on? Why is no one serving her?" "I don't know," the man whispered. "Looks intentional." Althea reached for her purse to retrieve a small, folded note, a birthday card written by her late husband years ago. She glanced at the words, drew in a long breath, and tucked it away. She refused to let bitterness find her. That had never been her way. But across the room, Julian's jaw tightened. He rose slowly, adjusted the sleeves of his navy suit, and opened his office door. As he stepped into the hallway, his steps were measured, deliberate. He had seen enough, and the Willow Room was about to learn the true weight of the woman they had dismissed. Kyle was mid-joke at another table, mimicking an accent to entertain two businessmen when a shadow crossed behind him. "Excuse me," came a calm but commanding voice. Kyle turned, startled. "Julian, sir, I didn't know you were here tonight." Julian's eyes didn't blink. "I've been here the whole time." There was a pause. Kyle's eyes darted nervously. "I've been watching," Julian continued. "Not just how you served the room, but how you didn't serve table fort." Kyle looked toward Althea, confusion and guilt rising like heat. "Oh, I didn't realize. That's my mother," Julian said, his tone now glacial. "The woman you ignored. The woman you treated as if she didn't matter." A hush fell over the tables near them. Even the soft music seemed to quiet. "I built this restaurant on her back," Julian said. "Every tile, every plate, every damn smile we offer, we owe to her sacrifices." Kyle stammered, but Julian raised a hand. "Don't explain. Just go. You're dismissed. For tonight. And we'll be having a longer conversation tomorrow." Kyle's face paled. He removed his apron in silence, the weight of judgment thick in the air. As Kyle walked away, defeated, the hush in the restaurant thickened like fog. All eyes shifted to table 14, where Miss Althea Monroe remained seated, composed, dignified, untouched by the drama swirling around her. Julian walked over slowly. He didn't speak at first. He simply bent down beside her, his hand gently resting on the edge of her table. "Mom," he said softly, "I'm sorry." Althea smiled faintly. "You have nothing to be sorry for, son. You didn't make that man who he is. I should have stepped in sooner." "No," she said, her voice low but firm. "You let him reveal himself. That speaks louder than anything you could have said." Julian swallowed, feeling the tightness in his chest. He had fought all his life to create something that honored her. Yet tonight she was reminded of battles that never seemed to end. "I wanted this place to be different," he whispered. "It still can be," Althea replied, touching his hand gently. "But only if you keep holding people accountable." The surrounding tables, once filled with whispers, now bore expressions of shame and admiration. The woman they ignored had just taught them something without even raising her voice. Sienna, the floor manager, approached quickly, eyes wide with concern. "Ms. Monroe," she began, placing a glass of water and a fresh menu on the table. "Please accept my sincerest apologies. We failed you tonight." Althea looked up kindly. "It's not just about me, dear. It's about the next woman who walks in looking like me and gets treated the same." Sienna froze. "I understand," she said quietly. "I'll make sure this never happens again." Julian turned to her. "Call a staff meeting tomorrow morning. First thing. Mandatory." "Yes, sir." As Sienna stepped back, a few other diners, especially those who had been watching silently, shifted in their seats. One young woman, seated with her husband, raised her hand. "Excuse me," she said, her voice shaky. "May I cover Miss Monroe's meal tonight?" Althea smiled, shaking her head. "That's very kind of you, but I can take care of myself. I always have." Laughter and light applause followed her response. It wasn't grand, it was real. And in that moment, Ms. Monroe reclaimed not just dignity, but control of the room. In the back of the restaurant, Kyle sat in the locker area, head in hands. His shift was over, but the humiliation was just beginning to sink in. He replayed everything: his dismissive tone, the refusal to check the reservation list, the assumptions. He hadn't just lost a job, he had exposed something deeper about himself. Meanwhile, Julian walked into the back room, flanked by Sienna. "I'll talk to him," Julian said. Sienna hesitated, then left them alone. Kyle stood. "Sir, I didn't know. If I had," Julian interrupted. "You shouldn't have to know someone as important to treat them with respect." Kyle looked down, ashamed. "Why did you treat her that way?" Julian asked, quieter now. "Really?" Kyle opened his mouth, then shut it again. The truth hovered in the air. He'd judged Althea on sight, made assumptions about her value, her worth, all because of age, because of race, because she didn't fit the usual clientele. "I guess I never thought it mattered," Kyle said finally. Julian's expression darkened. "It always matters. Every guest, every person, every second." He didn't need to yell. The weight of his disappointment did all the talking. Later that evening, Althea sat sipping her soup, finally served hot and with care. Julian had returned to his office briefly, leaving her alone again. She stared out the window at the passing headlights, memories drifting in like fog. She had been refused service before, once in the 1960s at a lunch counter in Georgia. She had been followed in department stores, talked over in meetings, and always she had kept her head high. But tonight, it wasn't just another insult. It was her own son's restaurant, a place that bore her spirit, a space built on the values she had taught him: fairness, kindness, excellence. And yet, even here, it had found her. But Althea wasn't bitter. She had outgrown bitterness. What she felt instead was resolve. She took out her phone and began drafting a message to Julian. This was a test, not just for your staff, but for you. You passed. But don't stop here. Make this place an example. She hit send, folded her napkin, and took another bite. The food tasted better now, not because of seasoning, but because truth had been served first. By the time Julian returned to the dining room, Althea was standing, coat in hand. Leaving already? He asked. I've been seen, she said, her smile soft. That's enough for tonight. Julian reached for her bag, but she waved him off. I carried myself in. I'll carry myself out. Several guests stood instinctively as she passed their tables. Some nodded respectfully. A few clapped quietly. It wasn't for drama, it was gratitude. She had shifted something intangible in the room. At the door, she turned. You know, son, a restaurant isn't judged by its menu. It's judged by who it welcomes and who it turns away. Oh, Julian nodded, his throat tight. I won't forget that, Mom. She smiled. I know you won't. Then she stepped into the night air, cool, clean, full of promise. Back inside, Julian faced his staff. Tomorrow, he said, everything changes. And it would. The next morning, before a single chair was unstacked or a coffee was poured, the staff of the Willow Room gathered in the main dining area. Some were bleary-eyed from a late night. Others were tense, not knowing what Julian would say. He stood at the head of the room, sleeves rolled, voice steady. What happened last night wasn't just about poor service. It was about character. No one interrupted. Kyle wasn't present. He had been asked not to return for now. Julian continued, this restaurant doesn't just serve food. It serves people. People who come in with stories, struggles, expectations, and dignity. And if we can't honor that, we don't deserve to open our doors. He paced slowly, locking eyes with each staff member. I don't care if someone walks in wearing designer shoes or old church flats. They deserve the same level of care, especially when no one is watching. There was a long silence. Then a hand rose. It was Maya, a newer waitress, barely 20. Mr. Monroe, she said nervously, we were never trained for this, for how to recognize our own bias. Julian nodded. That changes today. Over the next hour, Julian laid out a new plan. Not just updated training manuals, but mandatory empathy workshops hosted weekly, led by local community leaders and diversity consultants. We're not perfect, he admitted, but we're going to try harder than anyone else. The staff, once unsure, began to nod, some taking notes, others looking at each other with cautious hope. Sienna, the manager, stepped forward. We also need to talk about how we seat guests. That table by the kitchen, that's no longer where we put anyone. It's either treated with the same respect as the rest, or we remove it. Julian added, we'll also have a silent observer program, rotating members from the community dining anonymously, giving feedback. At first, some servers looked nervous, but Maya spoke again. I think it's good, she said. We need to be better. Last night was ugly. Julian nodded, but it doesn't have to define us. What we do next will. And the tone of the room shifted, not with fear, but a strange mix of accountability and purpose. And it all started because one woman didn't demand attention. She simply held her ground. Later that week, Julian received a phone call from an unexpected number. Councilwoman Ava Drayton, a longtime civil rights advocate and restaurateur ally. I heard what happened at the Willow Room, she said. Julian braced himself. Yes, ma'am, and we're working to fix it. You handled it with restraint. That's rare these days. Julian exhaled slowly. Thank you. But honestly, I'm still angry. angry that it happened here, in my mother's house, basically. That anger, she said gently, can build walls or open doors. I'd like to help you open some. She proposed a partnership, a quarterly dinner series highlighting Black history and culture, with proceeds going to local scholarships. Julian didn't hesitate. I'm in. Word of the incident and the restaurant's response began to circulate, first locally, then online. Posts praising Althea's grace and Julian's integrity trended under hashtags like hashtag dine with dignity and hash respect served here. Calls came from other restaurants asking for advice. Messages poured in from patrons expressing gratitude. But the most important message came via text. Proud of you, son. Let your restaurant reflect your heart. Mom. That same day, Kyle sat in his small apartment, staring at a blank job application on his laptop. The fallout from that night had been swift. Word spread. Other restaurants he'd applied to had heard about the incident. Brookstone wasn't a big city when it came to reputation, but deeper than that was something heavier. A mirror had been held up to him, and what he saw wasn't pretty. He kept thinking about the look in Miss Monroe's eyes. Not anger, not even disappointment, just disappointment in the world. He opened his search bar and typed, unlearning bias, where to start. For the first time in years, he wasn't blaming others. He was confronting himself. He drafted an email to Julian, not asking for his job back, just apologizing, genuinely. He ended it with, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I see it now. I see her now, and I'm sorry. He clicked send. Then he turned off his screen, sat in silence, and began to write something even more important. A letter to his younger sister, urging her to treat everyone with respect. Starting now, not when it's too late. The next Saturday, the Willow Room hosted a community open dinner, free to anyone who RSVP'd. No dress code, no assumptions, just shared space and shared food. Julian stood near the entrance, shaking hands, hugging old friends, welcoming newcomers. The lights were softer. The staff wore matching pins that read, everyone's seat is a seat of honor. Ms. Althea Monroe sat at table 3, not hidden in a corner, but front and center, surrounded by young students, elders, neighbors from all walks of life. As dessert was served, Julian raised his glass. I want to thank the woman who taught me everything, he began. My mother didn't walk in here to make a scene. She walked in with dignity. And because of that, this place is now more than a restaurant. People applauded, some wiped their eyes. We still have work to do, but if we can keep choosing empathy over ego, we'll be more than a business. We'll be a home. He turned toward Althea. She nodded, her eyes shimmering, not from pain, but pride. As the evening wore on, a microphone was passed from table to table, inviting anyone who wished to share a memory or experience about identity, dignity, or injustice. A teenage boy named Marcus stood. His hands trembled as he held the mic. I've never spoken like this before, he said, eyes darting toward Althea. But last year I got kicked out of a store downtown because they said I looked suspicious. I wasn't doing anything, just waiting for my mom. The room fell silent. Marcus glanced at Julian. What you did for your mom, it made me feel like I matter too. Althea smiled gently, nodding at him in quiet encouragement. Then an elderly white woman named Geraldine stood next. I was one of those people who used to think racism was exaggerated, she confessed. But last week I watched what happened to Miss Monroe at Tuas, and I cried because I realized I've stayed silent too long. One by one, people rose. Stories flowed. Shame dissolved into unity. And the Willow Room, once just a place to eat, had become a space to heal. A few days after the community dinner, a small package arrived at the Willow Room with no return address. Inside was a letter, handwritten in tight, unsure cursive. To Ms. Monroe, I was wrong. I didn't just ignore your order. I ignored your humanity. I assumed your presence didn't matter because of your age, your skin, your silence. But you taught me something that night. You didn't yell. You didn't shame me. You simply existed and made the world reckon with how it treated you. I'm sorry, truly. Kyle. Also inside the envelope was a pin, the same one the staff wore now. Everyone's seat is a seat of honor. Julian showed the letter to his mother without a word. Althea read it slowly. When she finished, she folded the paper and set it beside her tea. Maybe he'll grow, she said simply. Maybe that night wasn't the end of something. Maybe it was the beginning. Julian nodded. He wouldn't call Kyle, not yet, but he knew the seed had been planted. Weeks later, renovations began inside the Willow Room. Bawen Sasien Bamaim, not to change the furniture or the color palette, but the energy. Julian removed the table near the kitchen entirely. He brought in local artists to paint murals that celebrated community heroes, past and present. He renamed the private dining room the Althea Room and filled it with photographs of families from all backgrounds dining together, smiling, celebrating. He also added a new plaque at the entrance, in honor of those who walked in quietly and changed everything. Althea visited weekly, always choosing a different seat, always wearing that same calm smile. People approached her now, not out of guilt, but out of gratitude. "Thank you for being brave," one woman whispered. "I wasn't brave," Althea replied. "I was just tired of pretending to be invisible." Word of the transformation spread. Schools requested field trips. Churches held community luncheons. And Julian received an award from the city for promoting racial equity in the hospitality industry. But none of that compared to what he felt every time his mother stepped into the restaurant, knowing this place now truly reflected her strength. On Althea's next birthday, the entire staff surprised her. The dining room was filled with sunflowers, her favorite. Dozens of handwritten cards from patrons were placed on her table. Julian, standing beside her, raised his glass. This restaurant was built by hands, but it was shaped by a heart. He turned to her. "Yours." Tears welled in her eyes, though she tried to blink them away. "I never wanted a spotlight," she said, her voice a little shaky. "But if standing in it means lighting a path for someone else, then I'll stay here a while longer." The room applauded. That night, they launched a scholarship fund in her name for young people pursuing hospitality careers, with a focus on empathy-driven service. Althea stood once more. "I won't be here forever," she said, "but my hope is this. Every young person who walks through these doors will leave with a little more love in their hearts and a little more fire in their spine." Months passed, then a year. Then, the Willow Room continued to flourish, not because of trendy menus or social media campaigns, but because of culture. One evening, long after closing time, Julian walked through the now quiet dining room. He paused at table 3, Althea's favorite. He sat there, alone, remembering every lesson she'd taught him. Moments later, Sienna walked in holding a freshly framed photograph. "Thought this should go above table 3, she said. It was a photo of Althea, laughing, hand midair, surrounded by young people. Julian took the frame and gently placed it on the wall. "There," Hummy said. "Now she'll always have the best yum in the house." Outside, the wind stirred. Inside, silence settled like a warm blanket. Not empty, but full of legacy. The Willow Room had changed, because one woman walked in quietly and reminded everyone how to stand tall. True strength isn't always loud. It's steady, composed, and rooted in self-respect. Ms. Althea Monroe didn't demand respect. She inspired it. And in doing so, she changed not just one restaurant, but an entire community. Kindness must be a policy, but dignity, it should be our culture.